Okay, good evening, everybody. So, thank you all for joining us. My name is Helen Snell, and I'm chair of the SEBCID board. I'll be taking you through the proceedings this evening, which should take about 20 minutes in terms of my presentation. And of course, thereafter, we'll take any questions you may have. As usual, we're joined by representatives from the CID department at the City of Cape Town and most other SEBCID board members. As this is now our third such annual meeting, the proceedings are hopefully becoming familiar. But of course, each year we welcome new homeowners and new members, and therefore I will just repeat a few key points about the process. My presentation will be a recap of the efforts of our CID in the past year, but we will then run through a number of items on which members are asked to vote. I stress the word members because due to the requirements of the Companies and Intellectual Property Commission, homeowners must opt in to become members of our non-profit company before being allocated voting rights. Those of you who are members have had your membership status reviewed by both SEBCID and the City of Cape Town in advance of this meeting, and as you arrived have been given a voting form which indicates in red the number of votes you have according to your municipal property valuation. For the items on which we are voting this evening, please just tick whether you approve, object, or of course abstain on each item. When the votes are counted, your preferences will be weighted by the votes we know you have. What's going on? There we go. So moving on to the agenda, again, for those of you who've joined us in recent years, this is going to look increasingly familiar. We'll first be clarifying membership statistics of our CID. We'll then confirm we have the required attendance, whether it be in person or via proxy, to make this meeting quorate. I'll give a report on the activities of the CID to date. We will review our financial position at the end of year 2 and talk through some of the key takeaways from the financial results. We'll discuss in detail the surplus we ended the year with. We'll then present the proposed budget for year 4 of our CID term and the implementation plan for the same period and ask you to vote to approve these. The appointment of our registered auditor, accountant and company secretary will be confirmed, and then we'll move to your vote on the formal appointment of directors to the board. And then finally, we'll take any questions, obviously. So moving on to memberships, I'm just going to ask Emma to do a quick count of the members that came in the door. So with a very buoyant property market in the last 12 months, we have seen changes in ownership. Our membership figure has actually increased slightly from 144 this time last year to 146 currently. And that represents just under 30% of our property owners, which is still a relatively high participation rate for CIDs. So we require 30 members attending to be quorate this evening. We have 6 committee members in the room, 69 proxies.
Yeah, and 24 people.
And 24 members in the room. So we're obviously comfortably very quorate. So the board's efforts remain focused on these 4 key pillars of public safety, environmental improvement, urban maintenance and social responsibility, and then of course governance, ensuring that we manage this company in accordance with all relevant regulations, policies and our community's expectations. And then crucially, communications, ensuring that all of you who contribute financially to this CID are kept comprehensively and regularly abreast of how funds are being deployed. As we stand now 5 months into our 3rd year of operation, I feel much of what I will talk about this evening will sound somewhat familiar to those of you who have attended all our meetings and read our newsletters. And perhaps to a degree, there is an element of business as usual in what we do. But somehow each month, each week, and sometimes each day, new challenges pop up which require attention in various of these portfolios. In terms of governance and finance, there's little more to report. Sorry, in terms of governance, there's little more to report than the most important news that we again achieved a completely clean audit in our 2nd financial year. Here, great credit is due to our treasurer, Alison Lowe, assisted by our accountant, Ros Akers, and Emma Dorgan, who uber efficiently handles all our operations and admin. And while I do hope by now you are all fully aware, I feel I need to stress once again that none of the directors are in any way, shape or form remunerated for the time or effort that they put into the CID. All of their time is given voluntarily and freely. Turning now to each of those 4 pillars. Firstly, public safety. We now have a total of 117 cameras in place. The camera network is constantly being reassessed for its efficacy, and monthly update meetings are held with Deep Blue. Most recently, our focus has been on increasing the use of thermal cameras on our perimeter. At the time of the original installation, thermal cameras were rather expensive and thus deployed only at key locations. The bulk of the perimeter was covered by infrared cameras placed sufficiently close together to ensure full coverage. As the cost of thermal cameras has come down, though, we are now steadily investigating where we can replace 2 infrared cameras with 1 thermal. And the beauty of this equation being that 1 thermal costs approximately twice as much as an infrared, but covers twice the distance and, importantly, offers more advanced analytics given its thermal properties. UPS, uninterruptible power supply. This has probably been our greatest challenge to date, and huge credit, they're not here, but huge credit is due to Deep Blue, who has invested countless hours alongside us trying to find a reliable, cost-effective, somewhat future-proof solution, and all against the backdrop of an ever-changing landscape in terms of battery availability. But next month should finally see the commencement of the installation of our battery backup system, with uninterruptible power supply units being rolled out to our perimeter cameras. Batteries are in short supply, but Deep Blue is working hard to secure inventory for us. And the UPS contract that we've signed with Deep Blue mirrors that of our camera contract, i.e. the equipment is supplied, maintained and replaced when and if necessary by Deep Blue, and for this we pay them a monthly fee per unit. A partnership we've been very pleased to enter into recent months is having CCP, Community Crime Prevention, having them test our camera network. For a very affordable fee on a regular basis, CCP personnel take to the mountainside or streets at night and test a subset of our camera network. All conducted, of course, without prior warning to either SEBCID or Deep Blue. And this is really the only way to ensure that our cameras are as effective as we need them to be. And every single test reveals some form of tweak which can be executed to improve coverage. While, of course, no security measure is entirely infallible, we believe regular testing by a third party is invaluable. A reminder that the cameras on the perimeter are generating alerts 24/7, those in the interior just in the hours of darkness. And this is purely to manage the practicality of the alerts that would be generated if the analytics are running on the internal cameras throughout the daytime as people go about their business in our area. But of course, all cameras are always rolling, and if needed, the footage can be accessed day or night, notwithstanding load shedding, where we've yet to deploy UPS. With respect to footage, though, please do remember that for legal reasons, any request for access must go via a SEBCID board member who will pass this on to Deep Blue, from whom SAPS will source footage directly in the event a case is opened. And this is purely to maintain the integrity of the footage and keep a complainant at arm's length, but also makes sense from a practical perspective. Deep Blue is also contracted as the response provider for our entire area. That means regardless of whether or not you pay them to attend to your private residential alarm, if you see anything concerning or suspicious in our public spaces, they should be your first port of call. So please save the number on your cell phone and encourage anyone who works for you to do the same. In addition to paying CCP to test our cameras, we continue to support them with a monthly donation in recognition of the wonderful response they provide to any emergency, including medical. With this in mind, please also ensure that you have the WatchCon number saved to your phone and download the Buzzer app, which was developed by CCP and is not only a valuable way of calling for help in the event of emergency, but also for reporting municipal faults, among other things. SEBCID also maintains its monthly donations to Hout Bay Neighbourhood Watch, which plays a vital role in crime reduction in our valley. Hout Bay Neighbourhood Watch is responsible for installing and maintaining what are described as the community cameras in Hout Bay, i.e. those in the public spaces, for example, by the beach and on Chapman's Peak. We can also thank them from the licence plate recognition cameras at the entrance point to the valley. They maintain all the high sites and network infrastructure for these cameras and the WatchCon radio network. So on the topic of public safety, we thought it might be useful to look at some actual data for recent years. This chart shows serious incidents reported to CCP WatchCon over the past 5 years within Scott Estate and Barbianscliff. And as you can see, there is a very encouraging downward trend. So a reminder that SEBCID was established on the 1st of July, 2020. So right in the middle of this period. Now, I'm not suggesting that SEBCID can take all the credit for this, as these crimes in the Valley of Hout Bay overall have been reducing in recent years. But I think these statistics to some degree demonstrate that our public safety portfolio is delivering on its mandate. And just to be very clear, in case anyone has looked at the CCP WatchCon data, to arrive at the true picture, one does have to analyse each report, as the headline numbers generally reflect how the incident was called in. So, for example, in 2022, a shooting is reported on Scottsville Circle, but on reading the report, one discovers a resident called in what sounded like shots, but which turned out to be a car backfiring. Similarly, if a resident calls in suspecting an intruder, it can be logged as an attempted burglary, whereas on investigation, it may have been a window blowing open or a false alarm trigger. Where possible, I know CCP does clean up the data, but not always. So we have gone through each report with CCP, and the data in these charts for these crimes represents incidents which we know actually happened. I should say in all cases, though, they were minor, even if they are reported as burglary. We haven't had, thank goodness, anything as serious as a home invasion, even beyond this sphere of data. Looking at other relevant reports, the vast majority pertain to suspicious people or cars rather than actual incidents. And obviously the overall headline reported data from CCP is considerably higher, as it includes all incidents such as medical, municipal, people calling in fires elsewhere in the area, etc. Okay, so moving on to environmental improvement. This remains an extremely important portfolio for SEBCID. On a day-to-day basis, Andrew Preen and his team at Allo Africa maintain our public open green spaces. And it really is wonderful that Stephen and Ali, who were brought in by Andrew at inception, are still our same two dedicated staff. And I know they've come to take real pride in looking after our area, in which they now feel very invested. Between their gardening work, clearing out stormwater drains, and collecting the vast quantities of litter which gather in our area, on average, almost 5 bucket loads heads to the dump each month. Over and above the day-to-day work, there is a never-ending list of other projects being managed. We are regularly trimming vegetation or trees to ensure the cameras have adequate visibility, removing biomass which may have been dumped, removing fallen branches post-storms, etc., etc. More notable projects are the significant work undertaken to stabilise the banks of the Baviance River by staking and planting, the creation of paths along the river, and in a couple of specific areas, replanting and rectification work where trees have been felled. One such example being on Baviance Close, where we removed a ficus which was causing significant damage to an adjacent electrical box and lifting the road surface. Thereafter, we planted indigenous species and installed a screen to hide the electrical box. Quite recently, steps were installed where the pathway from Union Street meets Orange. As a popular thoroughfare, this path had become rather worn and the steps should prove more robust. It was very pleasing to see how much residents appreciated this upgrade. We've also recently carried out significant stabilisation work at the upper end of the path, which leads to the waterfall from the top of Baviance Cliff Road, an immensely popular walking route for many in our area and from elsewhere. Foot traffic was beginning to take its toll. Just last week, a bridge was installed at the point where the walk crosses the river itself. And lastly, almost 2 years since vegetation was cleared behind Fountain Drive and at the start of the walk to the waterfall, that process needed to be repeated to ensure visibility of the cameras was maintained. So just some pictures for you showing some of that work. The one on the left there being the screen to hide the electrical box. On the right, the upgrade to the Union Street path. The work done on the walk to the waterfall and the lovely new bridge across the river. One of the next most important projects to be tackled in this portfolio is the formal rehabilitation of the Baviance River. In partnership with the City of Cape Town Invasive Species Department, a great deal of work has already been undertaken. But to really do our best to return the river as close as possible to natural, to reduce flood risk as much as we can, and hopefully increase the proportion of the year during which it flows, SEBCID has sought the guidance of a panel of experts. Between them, a detailed rehabilitation plan has been devised. This has been presented to all relevant departments of the City of Cape Town, and pending their approval, SEBCID will execute on this plan with the ongoing guidance of said panel of experts. This detailed plan, once approved, will of course also be circulated to residents. In advance of the planting season next year, SEBCID is embarking on, in advance of the planting season, you found a picture of an owl box. In advance of the planting season next year, SEBCID is embarking on a programme of sourcing and growing indigenous plants to be sited in suitable locations throughout our area. Plants and possibly mature trees will be selected with the guidance of the City of Cape Town. They'll be selected for their suitability, taking into account shade, beauty, and attraction for birds and invertebrates. Locations will be chosen that will not pose long-term threats to views, roads, pavements, biodiversity, or security. And SEBCID will ensure that the plants are watered regularly during the warmer months, although we may need to prevail upon some local homeowners for assistance there. The response to our Owl Box project has been wonderful, and we've had many residents come forward offering to host boxes. The boxes are made to order by a specialist in Onrus, who charges only for materials. And our order of 4 boxes for spotted eagle owls and 4 for barn owls should be with us by the end of this year, at which time we'll assess the best locations of those that have been offered. And I do finally want to add a word on big bin scratchers. It is an ongoing challenge to stop vagrants going through bins in search of food and other recycling items which they might be able to sell on. Deep Blue does actively patrol, but even having 1 or 2 vehicles in the area, there are simply too many streets for them to be everywhere at once. So residents can help, please, by only putting bins and bags out in the morning, not the night before, adhering to the fortnightly schedule for recycling collection, and not actively leaving food out. And while I have your attention, tomorrow is not a recycling collection day. We aim to please. Turning to pillar 3, urban maintenance. As a general reminder, when it comes to logging service delivery requests, or C3 requests as they are known, all residents must please log the request themselves in the first instance and take note of the reference number. Only if an undue delay ensues should this be passed on to the CID to escalate. If you're unsure how to log a service delivery request, all the information is on our website. In terms of projects in this portfolio, many residents were in favour of additional traffic calming on Bobby-Arnscliffe Road, but the City of Cape Town Roads Department refused to grant permission for more speed humps, given the gradient of the hill. The compromise which was reached was the introduction of a 3-way stop at the junction of Darling Street and Bobby-Arnscliffe Road. A stop street's also been introduced at the bottom of Murray Road, where it meets Johan at SEBCID's behest. The sign has been installed, but the road markings will only be painted once construction in this area is completed. Since the municipality is not keen on installing mirrors, SEBCID has purchased and installed a mirror at this junction to improve safety. We're obviously aware this could be targeted by petty thieves, but there are multiple cameras in the area, which should hopefully deter those with light-fingered intentions. It has sadly already suffered some graffiti, but at least that rubs off. Parking in the cul-de-sac at the top of Bobby-Arnscliffe Road periodically causes headaches for local residents, despite the installation of signage asking visitors to park respectfully. We've been in dialogue with the Roads Department for several months now on the topic, and they did recently agree to demarcate some parking spaces, which we will now chase them to implement. And finally, our wish for more bins in the Hout Bay Common area was finally granted. Parks Department installed 4 more bins, which our Allo Africa team maintain. Our social responsibility portfolio remains multi-pronged. We continue to support the Hout Bay Volunteer Emergency Medical Service, whose aim now is to raise sufficient funds to employ permanent staff, such that its ambulance can operate 24/7. We still run first aid refresher courses for our local residents who've trained in first aid level 1. Plus, we have run 1 new first aid level 1 course this year, which was open to both SEBCID residents and other worthy members of the community. Other smaller projects include having donated a Mandela Day package for families at a Hangberg creche, supporting giving our local Hout Bay Museum and the anchors outside a lick of paint, and contributing to a new stove for Hangberg Dreams NPO. We continue to support a reading programme at the Dennis Goldberg House of Hope, which is now being run directly by the House of Hope rather than Shawco. And the scaling back of this programme has freed up funds, which the board concluded would be best redeployed to Bright Start, a Hout Bay NGO, which facilitates access to education for underprivileged children in our valley. We'll also be supporting Hout Bay Swimming Academy, which has become a sunbeam of the Darcy Sunshine Foundation, and will be running a programme in 2023 to provide vital swimming lessons to underprivileged grade R children in Hout Bay, obviously with the aim of preventing unnecessary drownings. On our projects, we have finally been able to erect signage around the area. We're required to inform the public that CCTV is in operation, but we've also erected signage where the river corridor is being rehabilitated, at the top of Bobby-Arnscliffe Road, at the dog park, and in 1 or 2 other key areas. Finally, we've talked so frequently about plans to install permanent skate ramps in the park at the bottom of Andrews Road. And while all relevant municipal departments gave approval almost 2 years ago, we've become bogged down in red tape. So we now have a new tactic, which is just to move ahead with our plans, keep the city and our local councillor fully abreast as we go, and force them to tear up the red tape. Turning now to the removal of invasive trees and vegetation from our area. This has always been set out in our business plan and motivated predominantly by the aim of mitigating fire risk, as well as improving biodiversity. It goes without saying that there is no desire to fell, tree or remove any tree or plant without very good cause. We are all well aware of the importance of trees to our environment. But invasive trees or vegetation in the wrong location can have a significant negative impact on the environment and materially increase fire risk. And without wishing to scaremonger, the threat of fire in our area is real. Over the years, I'm sure Hout Bay has been threatened by major fires many times, but I did want to share a few images of two recent major fires, one in 2000 and one in 2015. So these images are all of Hout Bay. You can see the top left image there, that's the fire making its way down above Yarnscliffe. And these last two images were taken just 4 days ago and of the mountainside directly above Scott Estate. Something we all dread, but which did actually come very close to home just this week and serves to highlight how critical it is to remove as much invasive vegetation and as many invasive trees as possible from our area, given their propensity to propagate fire versus the indigenous fynbos designed to burn, but in a regenerative manner. I can't believe that any of these images would leave any sensible person unconcerned about fire risk, and the board is committed to taking what action it can to mitigate the threat to our area specifically. I want to stress that SEBCID's endeavours are guided by all relevant legislation and city departments. But as we've stated many times, efforts here have proven a great deal more complex, given the frankly outdated stance taken by the City of Cape Town's Parks Department, which owns the bulk of the public open space in our area. Really flying in the face of received wisdom and even legislation on the topic, the City of Cape Town's arborist has a mantra of every leaf counts, which is described by City of Cape Town's own invasive species department as not being in keeping with modern thinking. But he creates a major block for us. Putting aside this interdepartmental contrast or even conflict, we do maintain a regular, open, vigorous dialogue with parks. We have made and believe we will continue to make progress in this portfolio with a view to reducing fire risk and other negative environmental effects. We will also in the new year be conducting a survey of our residents to determine those who might be in need of assistance in the event of a call to evacuate and to establish those who might be in a position to provide shelter. So please look out for that in your inboxes. That brings to a close the remarks I wanted to make on operations. Just a recap on our communication channels, because nothing that the CID does is of any value if those of you who reside here and are funding this are not aware. Our regular detailed newsletters are our most important communication channel through the year. These are emailed to more than 700 contacts we have on our database and then flagged on our dedicated WhatsApp groups, our Facebook page, and posted to our website, which really is a mine of all the information one could possibly need on our CID, as well as having a list of useful contacts at the City of Cape Town. But if you're not hearing from us and would like to, then please do let us know. Turning now to the formal business of this evening, and initially an overview of our financial affairs. So our audited financial statements for our second financial year, ended June 2022, were posted to our website on the 9th of November, and their availability was highlighted by an email to all residents, as well as posts on our WhatsApp and Facebook groups. So I do hope that those of you who care to review have had a chance to do so. I'll run through the headline figures this evening. I'll talk about expenditure and our 4 key pillars, explain the surplus we ended the year with and with plans for how that might be addressed, and then present the revised budget for next year. So income and expenditure in our second financial year. To reiterate, every month we receive our income from the City of Cape Town, representing the additional rates due from our community. And I stress the word due because regardless of whether or not we as homeowners are paying our CID rates, the City pays SEBCID each month. And this is something we've highlighted many times in the past, but I think it's worth reiterating, particularly in these tough economic times, that regardless of how many of our residents might be late in paying their bills, City of Cape Town remits us our CID rates every month to ensure that we can deliver on the business plan. And this delivered us just under 2.75 million rand in income for our second financial year. In terms of the core business, I will speak about the individual portfolios in more detail on the next slide. but in absolute terms, once again, the primary factor behind the difference in budget versus actual here is the public safety portfolio. Our general expenditure was broadly in line with budget, although again, our insurance premium was lower than the original budget, as were our audit fees and administration fees. Once again, we did not need to draw on our contingency budget. Single biggest contributor to the underspend in projects this year was our skate park ambitions. As I say, we're pleased to have made some progress with the City of Cape Town Parks Department in terms of the removal of invasive trees, and that's reflected in less underspend in this line item this year, but there is still a great deal more to be done. Lastly, in projects, signage has been erected, as mentioned, but at a lower cost than budget. Turning to the core business, as I mentioned, in absolute terms, the largest contributor to the underspend was the public safety portfolio, although this year by a significantly smaller degree of magnitude than in our first year. Overall, we are still benefiting from a very commercially competitive arrangement with Deep Blue. In addition, we've fortunately not yet had to dip into our public safety portfolio for any extraordinary response in terms of public disorder, but believe it's of significant value for our community that we do have reserves available to get a resident or residents out of the area in an emergency situation. We are also below original budgeted spend in both our social responsibility and urban maintenance portfolios, due to the factors we outlined last year, and this is reflected in some of the proposed changes to the budget for next year, which I will come to. From a procedural point of view, please note the budgets that were released from last year's surplus to finance the grids which we installed at the Bavianscliffe Road Bridge to deter the vagrants who've taken up residency there. So moving on to discuss the surplus with which we sit. It obviously doesn't appear logical for us to have a surplus. Oops. Oh, don't do this to me. Okay. Just seems to have run out. Yes, there you go. Okay. It obviously doesn't appear. I hope you can hear me. That's what you're here for. No, is it working? Yes. Okay, there we go. Third time. It obviously doesn't appear logical. I'm really stressing this point. But us to have a surplus, given our budgeted expenditure in each of our 5 years matches our income. But the reality, as we discussed at length this time last year, is that in the early years of a CID, expenditure takes time to reach a normalised run rate. In the very early stages, tender processes, some of which lengthy, had to be conducted before any cent could start outflowing. And this was particularly the case with our public safety expenditure. Repeating my words of last year, while we received our first invoice from Deep Blue in September 2020, we weren't running anywhere close to our targeted run rate of cameras until around April, May 2021, all of which inevitably created a surplus, particularly given this is the largest single item of expenditure. This was also the case, albeit to a lesser degree, with cleansing and environmental improvements, where a tender process also had to be conducted. In addition, as we highlighted last year, our social responsibility budget had been based on training 30 volunteers to first aid level 3, whereas in practice, we've only been able to train 17 volunteers to first aid level 1, something we're still very grateful for, but which costs considerably less. We've not been able to spend a cent yet on the planned skate park, as I've said, nor have we been able to deploy anywhere near the budget we had hoped on clearing invasive trees and vegetation. And all of these factors combined leave us sitting with a substantial surplus of almost 1.5 million rand, accounting for the CID policy requirements to retain a provision equivalent to 2 months of CID rates as a protection against unforeseen cash flow risks. So, what happens to this surplus? Firstly, it must be stressed that the City of Cape Town's CID policy just does not permit any surplus funds to be refunded or filtered back into ongoing expenditure, as while this might reduce CID levies in 1 year, it simply results in a major increase for ratepayers in subsequent years. Surplus funds can, however, be used for one-off projects, and our focus will be on ensuring any such expenses are financed from the surplus. As I've explained, a material proportion of our first year's budget for public safety now sits in the surplus. This gives us the opportunity to roll out battery backup to all of our cameras, funded from the surplus. The original budget for the skate park now sits in the surplus. Hence, assuming nothing thwarts our ambitions any further, monies for this project, which we do aim to deliver on this year, monies for this project could be released from the excess funds. Much of the original budget for removing invasive trees now sits in the surplus. Given the obstructive stance taken by City of Cape Town Parks Department, we're now focusing our attention further up the mountain in terms of mitigating fire risk. And we're in discussions with Sandparks regarding collaboration on a major project to remove many, if not all, of the pine trees along our urban edge. The cost of this project can be released from the surplus. And lastly, as we've mentioned, a detailed rehabilitation plan for the Bavians River has been prepared. We do believe the majority of this ongoing work can be funded from the core business, but again, any exceptional projects could be financed from the surplus. All of that being said, having a financial security blanket in case of unforeseen adversity is a strong position to be in. The unforeseen challenge we encountered this year, for example, being the large group of vagrants plus dog who took up residence under the bridge at Bavians Cliff Road. This was a perfect example of where having a surplus was a boon. Having brainstormed and concluded the best course of action was installing grids in the bridge arches, it was clear the project was going to be relatively costly and time would have to be invested in sourcing multiple quotes. In the short term, our strong financial position enabled us to swiftly install new cameras in the area to monitor activity, and just a few weeks later, install the grids. None of which would have been possible without the unparalleled negotiation skills of JJ from CCP, who convinced the group to move out from under the bridge in the first place. And we're obviously aware that the same group of individuals have now taken up residence just below the military walkway path, and that is just as much of a security risk for our area. We have a meeting tomorrow morning with all relevant landowners and Deep Blue and CCP to see what action we might take to better secure that area. And again, being in a strong financial position to do something we hadn't planned to do is a luxury. One obvious potential adversity is the risk of public disorder as well. Our business plan and budget has always, I don't like you. Our business plan and budget has always aimed to provide for the means to move residents out of the area should an emergency need arise. We're grateful we have not to date needed to deploy funds for this purpose, but knowing that we have the monies on hand to bring in a medical helicopter, for example, is an invaluable resource. Please do raise your hand if you can't hear me. Moving on to the proposed budget for next year. So in addition to focusing on releasing surplus funds where possible, the board has also taken the decision to scale back the budget for next year. Having originally been set to increase by 7.5%, the 2023-2024 budget is now proposed to only increase 4%, which, given the current inflationary climate, is in fact a reduction in real terms. As always, given we are presenting proposed adjustments to the original budget published with the business plan in 2019, there are some changes within the profile of spend, reflecting the day-to-day experience we now have of operating the CID. One of the most material revisions is the fact the original business plan had budgeted for a full-time admin assistant, whereas in fact we've opted for a more flexible role paid on an hourly basis as the workflow dictates. This moves this cost from staff to general expenditure and accounts for the bulk of the increase in this category, along with slightly increased accounting and secretarial fees. Expenditure allocated to projects, which in year 4 would have been solely the removal of invasive trees, has been shifted to the core business, as this has evolved into an ongoing process rather than a one-off event. In addition, the balance of the budget that had been originally earmarked for that admin assistance has been reallocated to the core business, primarily to public safety. In terms of the individual line items in the core business, revisions are a function once more of the fact we now have a more finessed understanding of where budget is required. Public safety, while always the single largest line item, has been allocated additional budget for battery backup for our perimeter cameras. And 2.5 years into the existence of SEBCID, the reality is keeping our public spaces clean and tidy and improving our environment has demanded and warranted more budget allocation than originally planned, particularly given the lower than anticipated needs in social responsibility and urban maintenance. A reminder that in public safety, the original budget had attempted to split the cost of these various functions, but since in reality we pay a combined fee per camera to Deep Blue, this is now reflected in one single line item. As part of the proceeds this evening, we asked members to approve the implementation plan. The plan formed part of the original business plan and budget and is revised twice a year to reflect progress. The latest version was published on our website on the 9th of November as highlighted, and we hope you've had time to review. Reconfirmation of our professional advisors in the form of Harry Curtis & Co as auditors, Ros Akers as our accountant, and Alison as our company secretary. Lastly, we turn to the election of our board directors. As per our memorandum of incorporation, a third of the board must resign each year, but may stand for re-election. So Jemima, Fani and Paul have all stepped down, but been renominated. So to summarise voting on the forms you were handed as you came in, please mark with an X in the box to approve, object or abstain on the proposed budget for our third financial year, the proposed implementation plan and the election of board directors. And obviously feel free to do that at the end if you have any specific questions relating to those voting items. But before we move on to take questions, I do have a few final words. Something I want to say this evening is something I feel I've been remiss in not saying before. And I know my name is the one most commonly associated with the CID and the one commonly seen on WhatsApp and Facebook comments. But the reality is there are 8 other people who work phenomenally hard for this CID and really do deserve some recognition. They might not thank me for shining the light directly on them, but without question it's due. So I won't make you stand up. Fani and Doreen Milan, Paul Maguire, Chazelle Kelly, Jemima Birch, Keith Cronwright, Alison Lowe and Emma Dorgan. These are the people giving up their time to attend monthly meetings with Deep Blue, walk the mountainside and streets to check camera locations or invasive vegetation, spend hours going through documents, quotes and budgets, pay bills, manage our environmental contractors daily, constantly ponder ways to improve our area or attend our regular board meetings. And this is by no means an exhaustive list of everything that goes on. I hope that they will agree with me when I say I think we have a wonderfully open, collaborative and cohesive team. Nothing is decided unilaterally. All projects, issues, problems, challenges are discussed openly, and 99.9% of the time the board reaches a full consensus when it comes to decisions. Each person plays their part, and I'm very grateful to all of them for the immense time and energy they give completely freely, and above all, the support they give me. So thank you. And with that, we will move to questions. So we are recording the meeting on my laptop for the benefit of those who may not be able to attend. So if you have a question, if you give the question and then I'm going to repeat it so that it can be heard for anyone who may want to tune in later. So, any questions? Hi. We often ask, and the last well, I was going to say off the record, but this on the record. The last time I spoke to Councillor Quintus, he felt that the wheels were turning very, very, very slowly, because what has to happen is that the land has to be transferred from one department to another before anything can even commence in terms of the environmental impact, etc. And I know that recently somebody who is in a relatively informed position suggested that that had taken place. So I followed up with Councillor Quintus, and he said that the question now needed to be addressed at a provincial level and gave me a contact. So we did email the lady. She hasn't got back to me, which isn't particularly surprising. So we should probably make a mental note to chase her. All I can say is I think it's deeply, deeply frustrating that we didn't have a CID before that decision was taken, because we probably would have been in a relatively strong position to object to it. But, you know, the decision is taken. Whether it actually does go through and how long it takes remains to be seen. So nothing really particularly informative, but we will follow up with the lady at the province who I'm told is the person to speak to. And the question, of course, which I failed to repeat, was, do we have any information on the proposed clinic on Hout Bay Common? And again, yes, the gentleman is making the point that it's probably still zoned parks and will need to be rezoned, which can also take a long time. So there's a lot that needs to be done. I know that this person who's in a relatively informed position posted on Facebook suggesting they might break ground this year, next year. I find that very hard to believe. Yes.
Have you made any headway with the land, not on the common called land grab or land invasion on Babian's Club of a certain homeowner who is in actual fact decided that his land is extended across the river and is perfect for his own personal use and in inverted commas for his own sense of security.
Have we made, the question is, have we made? Yes. So the question relates to a fence that has been erected illegally within the Babianscliffe River outside of the property boundary of the homeowner adjacent, who has done so arguably, or in his explanation is it's to improve his security. It is just a bewildering situation that the City of Cape Town do nothing about this. We have fought it from every angle. We will continue to fight it, but perhaps the solution may simply be to remove it. I know that if I were to erect a fence outside my house in the middle of the road, the roads department will come and take it down very quickly. Quite why, when that happens within a river that is owned by stormwater, it doesn't happen is remarkable. And I have to say, in their defence, I do feel every time we engage with the City of Cape Town, whichever department it may be, the individuals that you meet are hardworking and committed and they want to get things done, but they tie themselves up in red tape. And this is what we've encountered with the skate park. We had a meeting in the park 2 years ago. Councillor Quintus managed to get the relevant representative from every single department that had any kind of purview over the situation, got them all together at the same time. Everybody verbally gave their approval that we could put some skate ramps in. But then to actually get the paperwork signed off to do it has just proven impossible. So given that there's no good reason not to do it, we're going to do it and then have them sign it off afterwards. And we've been connected with a very passionate skater who's done this all over Cape Town apparently, and regularly does it without prior approval. And because it's clearly an asset for the community, there won't be an issue. Taking a fence down in the river, if the CID does that, it would be this CID belongs to the community. Everybody in the CID, whether they're a member of the company or not, they contribute financially. And I do believe quite strongly we shouldn't pit any individual homeowner against the CID. But it's also very frustrating when you don't get the support for something that is so blatantly illegal. Not only in terms of taking land that isn't your own, but to erect a clear view fence with barbed wiring in an environmental area is just astonishing. We won't give up. But no progress, basically. That would have been the short answer. And I know you're fighting very hard as well, as are many others. The problem does lie with the department that owns the land. If it was owned by roads, if it was owned by even parks, maybe, it would be a different situation. But it seems to be an inadequacy within stormwater. Hi.
Could you explain the process by which the contributions aside for the roads are set each year? Is it the City of Cape Town which sets the control of the contribution to them?
So the question is, how are the contributions that each homeowner makes decided? That's probably the one thing about the CID that I can't actually give you the underlying calculation for, but what happens is, so when we sat down in the first instance and we drew up our original 5-year budget, that is then presented to the City of Cape Town, and through a very long process, we eventually agree that 5-year budget. They then take the headline number, they go away, and on their side, they calculate an amount per 1 million of municipal property valuation that is paid, and it's a different amount for residential and non-residential. So somewhere behind the scenes, they have a model that says when whatever our revenue was last year, 2.75 million, they put that number into a spreadsheet, and that churns out. For last year, it was 96 Rand, including VAT, per 1 million of property valuation for residential. So if your home is valued at 10 million, you'll be paying 960. So it's defined by the budget that SEBCID set. It's a hard and fast calculation that the City of Cape Town churn out to us. So everybody makes the same contribution, but it varies by the amount that your municipal property is, whatever that valuation is.
There's no scope given the surplus to rein back on the increases going forward.
The question is if there's a scope given the surplus to rein back on the increases going forward, but that's exactly what we have done for next year. So rather than the budget was forecast to go up by 7.5% each year. And in simple terms, it's not rocket science, you can see it in the numbers. The budget was set over the 5-year period. We set the original first year budget, and then thereafter, every year it was set to increase 7.5% at a headline level. What's a curiosity is that when you get into year 2, even as you approach year 2 and you say, right, as we're going through year 1, we can see that some of these line items aren't exactly as where costs are falling as we go on. Then we change year 2, but we don't change year 3, 4, and 5. When we're going through year 2, then we change year 3. So each year we're only changing 1 year ahead. So that 7.5% increase was still what was set for next year and the year after. But because of the surplus and because of the fact that it's not that we don't need all the money that we budgeted for, it's really the timing of how long it took before the costs to come in the first year. But it has created a surplus, and it does enable us to feel in a stronger financial position going to next year. And thus, rather than increase the budget by 7.5%, we're only going to increase it by 4.5%, which, as I said, where inflation is running, means in real terms, it is a reduction. So we did scale the budget back. And I have had long conversations about the surplus and why it can't just be brought back into the budget. We have an accountant who looks after 11 other CIDs and has been doing this as her area of expertise for over a decade. We have a City of Cape Town CID department that's been managing CIDs for well over a decade and run 52 of them. And they just tell me that it is not sensible to do that at this stage in our existence. Where the benefit of this will really come in will be remarkably this time next year when we stand up here and present to you a budget for the next 5 years and ask people to vote on whether to renew. Then we do start with a clean sheet of paper. Then we have a really clear idea of where our costs are. And then we will be able to look at things that are projects and genuinely take that surplus money and use them. But to just filter it back into the budget now, which I know feels like it's what we should do, or even put it back in people's pockets, unfortunately, those with a much greater degree of experience of running these companies than I have advised me that it just isn't sensible. And I'm going to guess that that's because it's been done in the past. And I feel with the City of Cape Town, I mean, we have a representative in the room, but I'm going to speak on their behalf. Every year, the City of Cape Town slightly changes the memorandum of incorporation, or slightly changes our procedures, slightly changes the way we do things. These guys are incredibly focused on the governance of these companies. And whenever inevitably things go wrong, and whenever something goes wrong, they change procedures to account for it. So I have a strong sense that the reason that they are adamant we shouldn't be filtering the surplus back in is because they've seen the pitfalls of doing that historically.
Just adding to that question, I think the add-on you pay is capped at maximum 25% of your rates. So I think there's a slight concern as to whether this is continued. I think that's the cap. I speak on the correct.
Yes, no, so the question is there not a cap on what the CID rates can be as a percentage of our additional rates? This is also a complicated calculation, and it took me a long time to get my head around it, and I'm going to hope that I can explain it to you in the right way. So the City of Cape Town looks at our rates as a cent in the rand that they charge based on our municipal property valuation. So if you look at your rates account, you'll see, and it's published every year by the City of Cape Town for all the various different areas, etc. You'll see what cent in the rand is applied to your valuation to derive what you pay per month in rates. The cent in the rand that's applied to your property valuation to derive the CID rates, that divided by the city cent in the rand can't be more than 25%. And I have it in a spreadsheet, which I'll happily share with you. But I think when we all started off thinking that we couldn't increase people's rates accounts by more than 25%, for example, but that's not the way you calculate it. It's what the percentage of your municipal value is that goes to the CID, that divided by what the percentage of your municipal value goes to your basic rates can't be more than 25%. And we're a long way off that. But I'm happy to share those numbers with anybody. I mean, it's all very transparent. And the City of Cape Town also annually publishes every CID's cent in the rand. So you can go away and have a look and say, well, if I was living in Llandudno, what would I be paying for a CID? If I was living in Penzance, what would I be paying for my CID? You can also see what all of their budgets are. I mean, everybody is transparent. Everybody's budget is on their website. You can see where they all spend their money. Yes.
That we have to get this thing going, is proving to be outstanding. I think, the results are there, and I think, we are vindicated, the people that were in favor of it, and I hope the people that were doubtful, are now on board. Congratulations to you and the rest of the team.
But
It's a pity that there's no reward. Maybe you could put something in the budget to, you know, something.
Find my cat.
My question is that 55-year period. Do you have to go through the whole process again of voting and getting the 51% and blah, blah, blah? Or is it-
So the question is, and firstly, so thank you for the compliment that the process that we went through to establish the CID now appears to have been vindicated. The results are there and it's functioning, and you know that hopefully that those who were not in favour have come around. And just to answer that question, I have to say some of the emails that give me the greatest pleasure is to get emails from people who were really vehement objectors in the early days, and to now say, actually, this is great. And obviously nobody knew what this was going to look like when it was up and running. And I can assure you, if I'd had the slightest inkling of how much time it would take, I would have never got involved, ever. And my husband wouldn't have let me. Yeah, so those are I would say a lot of the dissenters have come around. There are still a few people who hate this, and they have every right to do so, and that's fine. Next year, so this time next year, it's actually remarkably more formulaic. So we will present a new 5-year budget. So obviously we will sit and look, we'll be presenting the budget for year 5 of our term, of first term, then a new 5-year budget for a proposed second term, a revised business plan, which will obviously look a lot like the first one, things don't change, a revised implementation plan, and the members of the company will vote. Only the members of the company vote. So it's a very different proposition than first time around when every single homeowner had a vote. So the decision will be taken at this forum, and it will be taken by the, you know, currently we have 146 members. That number is not going to be materially different next year, I don't imagine. So it will be taken by the members of the company.
It's quite interesting that there's 146 members, but you've got something like 700 people altogether on WhatsApp. So presumably 560 of them are not members, but they still use the WhatsApp facility to get you to stand on your head to do things.
The question relates to how is it we only have 146 members and yet there's 700 people on our database that I mentioned. So firstly, there's 486 homes, I think we checked the other 486 homes, something like that, registered homes. And then obviously a lot of them have multiple people living in the home. So we have multiple email addresses. So that's how we get to 700 people on our database. But honestly, it's remarkable. And again, Alma, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but we have just about 30% of our words will escape me, but people who could be members, only about 30% are members. But that's high for CIDs. So I was looking at the City of Cape Town Central CID the other day, looking at their website, and it covers a huge area of the CBD. They have 74 members. I don't know. Alma, do you know how many registered properties they have? They must have hundreds. And yet so their participation rate must be fractional. And it's weird. I mean, it's not a great deal of effort to become a member. You fill in a form and that's it. But again, as we started this process, the City of Cape Town very clear to us that you'll see not many people will become members.
And is a business improvement district different from a CID, or is it just a different name for it?
The question is if a business improvement district is different, or it's just a different name for it, and it just generally reflects that it's got a far greater density of commercial. So examples would be Voortrekker Road, I guess. Others where they're highly concentrated commercial rather than the residential.
It's the same thing.
It's exactly the same structure. It's exactly the same structure. Obviously, it's a completely different kettle of fish when you're coming to. I dread to think what their public safety spend must be when you're trying to protect commercial premises.
Two questions. One on the surplus. Would it be possible to utilize the surplus in a revenue generating activity? Whereby we perhaps do something that generates a revenue, whether it's a bait or something, we invest that money in something that enables that surplus to grow to the point that we know that we open up and then the amount that we need to pay gets reduced. That's the first question. The second question, is there any advantage or has any thought been put into collaborating with other institutes within our bank?
Two questions. First one is, could we put the surplus into some kind of revenue generating operation, events that might, are you suggesting it would generate revenue on an ongoing basis so that?
Well, once a year. Or
Yeah.
whatever.
Pretty sure that I'm fairly certain that is outside of scope and not allowed by the memorandum of incorporation, and that the only revenue that can be generated is from the additional rates. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm fairly, I can 100% clarify, but I'm fairly certain that we're not allowed to take ratepayers' money and use it to generate additional revenue to offset what we pay. But I'll check it. Uplifting ourselves. And second question was collaboration with our CIDs. We collaborate a lot. So we have a WhatsApp group. All the Hout-based CIDs are on there. One thing I will take credit for is that I don't think the Hout-based CIDs had ever spoken to each other before we came along. So something that we went through before we even wrote the business plan was we sat down with representatives from each of the other then 5 CIDs and said, talk us through your experience. What mistakes have you made? How would you do things differently? How can we learn? And that was extremely useful. Then we instigated the setting up of a WhatsApp group, and it's not the busiest group, but we do share information. So when we came to sign our contract with Deep Blue, we knew one of the other CIDs had a contract with Deep Blue. There's just no point reinventing the wheel. We took their contract and adapted it for ours, and they shared it very happily. When it comes to things like POPIA declarations, various other documentation that we have to have, if somebody else has got a template, then use it. There's been quite a bit of intel shared this week in the run up to AGMs, because some of the other CIDs maybe have people who are new on the admin side and don't quite know what's going on. So I helped another CID out this morning with a definition of what each of the 4 pillars were, because they were scurrying around because they're AGMs tonight as well. So I don't know what more. I think it would be difficult for us to collaborate in a way that would help us save money, but I think we can. Something we have done collaboratively actually was on the battery backup. So when the work that Deep Blue put in to help us get to a point where we could really consider a solution, we highlighted that to the other CIDs, and 2 other CIDs came with us, met with Deep Blue, and at least one of them is taking that same solution. So, we did the legwork for them, but they get the benefit. So where we can, we do. Oh, yes. So the question is, what's the difference between a member and a homeowner that pays a contribution to the CID? So every homeowner pays a contribution to the CID. Members are people who have chosen to become members. They've opted in to become members, and that is purely a requirement of the Companies and Intellectual Property Commission. You can't make someone a member of a company. They have to choose to become a member. And it is a curiosity that 70% of the homeowners in this area choose not to bother to become members and thus can't vote. Yeah, so and to become a member, you fill in a form. We verify that form is valid, that you are the homeowner, etc. And then at a board meeting, it's ratified. You then have the right to vote. But if people don't apply to be members, you can't force them to. And I actually really don't know why they choose not to.
Doesn't make sense.
No, but again, City of Cape Town will tell you it happens everywhere. That they have CIDs where 5% of the homeowners are members.
So where do project ideas come from? Or ideas for social upliftment? Is there a formal channel to submit ideas? And then have ideas been sort of discarded by the directors?
So the question is, where do the ideas come from for projects and for social responsibility? Is there a forum for that, and have any ideas been discarded? So again, when we go back to the very beginning of the process of establishing the CID, the first thing that happens is a survey. So what's at the time, you then have a steering committee, which is the group of people who've come together to try and drive the process. And they, again, with great oversight from the City of Cape Town, they put together a survey. It was a very long survey, 80 questions, something like that, can't remember off the top of my head. And that survey is sent to as many homeowners as we can possibly reach. And the survey basically says, what would you like to see improved in the area? What are your concerns? And it's the results of that survey, and that you have to get at least 20% of homeowners responding to the survey before you can move forward in the process. City of Cape Town won't let you go any further, because they're saying, look, if you don't even get 20% of people to respond to the survey, you're just not going to get buy-in for the CID anyway. So we got 46% response, which was great. 90% of the responses said that people were concerned about public safety, and that's obviously what every survey result comes back as. There were another, probably the only other definable category was environmental concerns. So the business plan then has to mirror, as per CID policy, the business plan must mirror what the results of the survey were, because the business plan aims to deliver to improve the issues the community has. But you are also required to spend across those 4 pillars. So nobody responded to the survey saying that they had major concerns about social upliftment and they would like to see money allocated to that portfolio. But for very good reasons, when you create a CID structure, the City of Cape Town insists that you do allocate some to that pillar. And that has to be defined in your business plan. So the steering committee were the ones who sat down and brainstormed as to what the issues were. There were public meetings held, which filled this room at the time, and issues came out of there. But I think really the overriding concern that everybody had was medical, and was the fact that if you have a medical emergency, we don't have an ambulance, a permanent ambulance. Things have actually changed quite a bit really in the last 3 years, in that CCP has ramped up its medical offering and is committed as much as it possibly can to always having a paramedic, but it's still one person. And if he's asleep or attending to somebody else, then we struggle. And that was where we came up with the idea. The core of the social responsibility budget was really about training volunteers within our community to quite a high level of first aid, such that they could be our frontline response. But what became clear was that to do that, they had to commit a lot of time, and it wasn't time that people had. So as I said, not only did that mean we were only able to train people to level 1, it impacted the first aid kit we could give them, because you can't give them lots of fancy stuff if they've not been trained to use it. So we were planning on having a defibrillator in the area, but we couldn't train people to the level to be able to use it. And so that's where other projects came in, and we have been approached. So the reading program at the House of Hope, that actually came out of a conversation where they approached us because when they were in construction, they were concerned about security of the site. And they were just got chatting about what the facility was going to have. And it was actually one of our board members who'd always had a passion to see help improve reading for underprivileged children, and the reading program came from there. Now we do get approached, but we only for small amounts. I mean, the stove for Hangbird Dreams NPO, we gave them £1,000. It's wonderful if we can support causes directly in our area. I'm going to say something a bit off record here, which is we're supposed to dedicate our social responsibility spend to our area, but there's obviously not causes really here. But one we do have is the museum, and it's wonderful. We've been able to support the museum. We've built some storage. We've given them some paint. But otherwise, we do things outside, often where we see people asking. So when I must stop talking. When we saw the wire mesh whale projects, they were trying to raise money for that on the beach. We just thought that's a great thing to support. We don't give them a huge amount of money, but we help them get to their goals. But if anybody has an idea, my point would be absolutely approach us. What have we rejected? The original business plan, I think probably the most contentious thing was compost toilets in the park. And that was a real, thank you, a real that divided opinion, and eventually we just dropped it, even though you can still see a merit of it. We didn't do that. We did talk in the business plan about some hard landscaping of the green belt below Darling Street down to where the old bowling centre is. But then it's just, if it does look like the clinic is going to come, it felt like it wasn't a wise use of funds to really invest too heavily in that area if it was going to turn into a clinic in the not too distant future. I'm going to stop. Does that answer your question?
I think we have load shedding.
I'm not going to talk till 10 o'clock, Paul. Sue.
I don't have a question, but I just like to say, with your mentioning social responsibility, on behalf of the museum, I'm grateful the museum is for the support, and particularly for the very expensive thing that had to be used for the painting of the anchors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue, for expressing the support, the gratitude of the Hout Bay Museum. Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure. And we didn't do the painting ourselves, but that's the key point. Happy to buy the paint as long as someone else does it. Any other questions? Yes.
Good question. I'm on the board. It's settled. And if she goes, it will be a huge vacuum, and the last meeting we were running. So the fear is for new blood. And often people here to know what you get, maybe here about it yet. You know something else, and you can put with it. Have a white lie. Get somebody. We really do need new blood. Some of us started years ago on the committee.
Yes. So, well, yes. Keith making the point that it would be lovely if there were anybody else out there within the community that wanted to come forward and give some time. On the one hand, as I say, I think our board works very well. It's all the same people, well, largely the same people from the very beginning, and that helps a lot. We all know each other, but new blood is great, and there's lots of new homeowners in the area. I can't do this forever, but I don't mind. Yeah, and if perhaps also, finding somebody that wanted to come in and take on more of the work might help as well. But the door is always open if anybody would like to throw their hat in the ring, and any other metaphors that I can come up with. Thank you, Keith. Anything else? Okay, with that, whatever the time is, 19:42, we'll close the meeting. So please, yes, return your voting forms. We have got a load of pens here if you don't have. We also have some, I'm sorry to labour the point, but we have some very informative pamphlets here about how to reduce fire risk at your home. We've sent them around electronically in the past, but a huge lesson from the Neisner fires was that some homes stood while all around them burnt, and that was a lot to do with the measures that those individual homeowners had taken. So if you would like some leaflets, please grab them, or if you go on our website and search for fire, you will find them. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.